The sleek Aston Martin gleamed under the autumn sunlight as it snaked up the winding coastal road of Crystalline Bay. Behind its tinted windows, Thaddeus Everett sat with his eyes fixed on the financial reports displayed on his tablet, barely registering the breathtaking ocean views most people would pay millions to wake up to. At 62, Thaddeus had amassed a fortune that placed him firmly among the world's elite technological visionaries. Halcyon Industries, his brainchild, had revolutionized quantum computing, making him not just wealthy, but powerful enough to shape the digital landscape of entire nations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As the car approached the imposing gates of the Meridian, his cliffside modernist mansion, Thaddeus swiped to approve another acquisition, a struggling AI startup with promising patents. Another day, another empire expansion. The gates parted silently, recognizing the vehicle's signature. That's when Valencia noticed it first, a small splash of color against the pristine white of the limestone driveway. "Sir, there's something." "On the ground by the fountain," Valencia Pierce said, Thaddeus's executive assistant of 15 years. She'd long abandoned using his first name, respecting the wall of formality he'd constructed around himself after the tragedy. Thaddeus barely looked up. "Probably debris from the gardeners. Have maintenance deal with it." But as the car drew closer, Valencia's brow furrowed. "It looks like a piece of paper, folded into some kind of origami. This is the third one, this week." This finally caught Thaddeus's attention. "The third? Why wasn't I informed?" "I mentioned it in yesterday's security briefing," she replied carefully. "You said it was inconsequential." The car stopped, and Valencia stepped out, retrieving what appeared to be an origami butterfly, crafted from thick, expensive art paper in brilliant shades of turquoise and gold, colors that seemed intentionally chosen to catch attention against the monochromatic palette of the Meridian's grounds. "Should I dispose of it, sir?" Valencia asked, holding the delicate creation. Thaddeus stared at the butterfly for a moment, an unexpected feeling of déjà vu washing over him. "No, bring it to the lab. I want it analyzed for fingerprints. DNA, whatever they can extract. Someone has breached our security 3 times now. I want to know who and how." As Thaddeus strode into the mansion, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that had gripped him. In the world, where he controlled nearly everything, these mysterious origami appearances represented an unknown, and Thaddeus Everett had eliminated unknowns from his life decades ago, along with the chaos they inevitably brought. What he couldn't possibly know was that these innocuous paper creations would soon unravel the carefully constructed reality he'd built around himself, triggered by the small hands of an 8-year-old girl he'd never met, living in a modest cottage at the edge of his exclusive world. The morning fog clung to Wisteria Cottage like a protective embrace. Inside, Zara Morgan sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by a kaleidoscope of art supplies. At 8 years old, Zara possessed an artistic gift that defied traditional explanation. Her small fingers moved with deliberate precision, folding a sheet of crimson paper with gold flecks into an intricate origami heart. Unlike other children her age, who might create such things from pre-printed instruction books, Zara worked from something only she could perceive, a kind of blueprint that materialized in her mind when she touched certain objects or visited certain places. "Zara, breakfast!" called Orion Morgan from downstairs. At 36, Orion had the weathered look of someone who had lived many lives compressed into one. The faded tattoos on his forearms hinted at his former career as a musician before he'd settled in Crystalline Bay 5 years ago with his daughter. Zara carefully placed the completed heart into her backpack alongside her school supplies. "Coming, Papa!" The kitchen of Wisteria Cottage was modest but warm. An antique farmer's table dominated the space, mismatched chairs gathered around it like old friends at a reunion. It stood in stark contrast to the sleek, minimalist mansions that populated most of Crystalline Bay. "Remember, Ms. Winters is picking you up from school today," Orion said, placing a bowl of oatmeal sprinkled with cinnamon and sliced bananas. In front of Zara, I have a double shift at Harmonic Haven. Harmonic Haven was the music therapy center where Orion worked, helping children with developmental challenges express themselves through sound, a far cry from his days touring with the Midnight Echoes, the band that had briefly catapulted him to fame before everything fell apart. "I can walk home by myself," Zara suggested, her amber eyes serious beneath her cloud of dark curls. "I'm 8 now. Layla walks home by herself." Orion shook his head firmly. "Crystalline Bay isn't like other places, Zarbear. The houses are far apart, and there's that stretch along the cliff road with no sidewalk." What he didn't say was that Crystalline Bay was a place of extremes, extreme wealth that often bred extreme isolation. The children of tech billionaires and hedge fund managers rarely walked anywhere alone, shuttled instead in luxury vehicles with private security details. Wisteria Cottage existed in a liminal space, technically within the prestigious postal code, but worlds away in every other respect. "Will you at least think about my art program application?" Zara asked, changing tactics. "Ms. Paulson said she's never seen anyone with a natural understanding of color theory like mine." Orion's expression softened. "The one at Halcyon Arts Center? Zara, we've talked about this. It's $5,000 for the semester. But they have scholarships, and it's connected to Halcyon Industries, which means they have all the newest digital tools and real artists who come to teach and—" "We'll see," Orion interrupted gently, the universal parental phrase that usually meant no. "Finish your breakfast or you'll be late." As Zara reluctantly returned to her oatmeal, Orion glanced at the refrigerator where her latest school art project was proudly displayed. A surprisingly sophisticated rendering of what appeared to be sound waves transformed into a visual pattern. Below it, in her careful handwriting, "What Moonlight Sonata looks like." Orion couldn't explain Zara's talents, but he recognized their uniqueness. Sometimes he wondered if they came from her mother, a thought that always created a hollow feeling in his chest. Zelda had been gone for 7 years now, leaving him to raise their daughter alone. After breakfast, Orion walked Zara to the bus stop at the end of their unpaved driveway. As they waited, a familiar Aston Martin glided past, its engine purring, like a mechanical panther. "There he goes again," Orion muttered. "Who?" Zara asked, though she already knew the answer. "Thaddeus Everett, Mr. Halcyon Industries himself. Probably hasn't driven himself anywhere in 20 years. Zara watched the luxury car disappear around the bend, her expression unreadable. What Orion didn't know was that his daughter had been seeing that car every morning for weeks now, not just from the bus stop, but up close at the gates of the Meridian, where she'd been leaving her origami creations. At school, Zara moved through the day with her usual quiet focus. Crystalline Bay Elementary was an architectural marvel of glass and sustainable materials, funded largely by donations from the tech magnates whose children attended. Despite the school's resources, Zara often felt like an outsider. Her second-hand clothes and packed lunches set her apart from classmates who wore designer outfits and ordered sushi for lunch delivery. "Zara Morgan, daydreaming again," Mrs. Ellison commented, though not unkindly, when she caught Zara sketching in her math notebook. "Perhaps you'd like to tell us what 7 times 8 is?" 56, Zara answered without hesitation. She might drift into her artistic world, but numbers had always been friendly to her. Each one had its own color and personality in her mind. During recess, while other children played elaborate games requiring expensive sneakers and synchronized parental playdates, Zara sat under her favorite magnolia tree, working on another origami creation. This one was taking shape as a crane, folded from paper the color of a storm-tossed sea. "What are you making now, weird girl?" Eliza Winston Huxley approached, her two constant companions flanking her like miniature bodyguards. As the daughter of Crystalline Bay's most prominent venture capitalist, Eliza wielded her social power with the same calculation her father used in boardrooms. Zara didn't look up. A crane. In Japan, they symbolize good fortune and longevity. "Who are you making it for?" "Your imaginary friend." Eliza laughed, the sound echoing off her followers like a practiced routine. "No," Zara replied simply. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's for someone who needs to remember something important." Eliza rolled her eyes. "Whatever. My dad says your dad used to be famous before he became a nobody. Is that true?" The words stung, but Zara continued folding. "My father helps people find their music when they've lost it. That makes him somebody important." Unsatisfied with Zara's reaction, Eliza sauntered away, already bored with this particular torment. Zara finished the crane, holding it up to catch the sunlight filtering through the magnolia leaves. The paper seemed to glow from within, revealing intricate patterns Zara had drawn before folding, patterns that would remain hidden unless the crane was held at precisely the right angle to the light. After school, Zara did something she'd never done before. She lied to Ms. Winters, telling her that Orion would be picking her up directly from the playground instead of the usual pickup area. Once Ms. Winters drove away, Zara set off on a path she'd carefully mapped out in her mind over several weeks. The route to the Meridian was 3 miles from Crystalline Bay Elementary, winding along exclusive neighborhoods where homes were concealed behind elegant landscaping and sophisticated security systems. Zara walked with purpose, occasionally stopping to collect interesting leaves or stones that caught her attention. These weren't random detours. Each object resonated with something she perceived as a kind of music only she could hear. Approaching the Meridian was always the trickiest part. The estate was surrounded by a perimeter of discreet but highly advanced security measures, motion sensors, cameras disguised as landscape features, and occasionally uniformed guards making rounds. But Zara had discovered something fascinating. During her weeks of observation, every day at precisely 4:17 p.m., the security system cycled through a 3-minute diagnostic check, creating a brief window where a small section near the eastern gate registered no movement. Slipping through this gap had become a calculated risk Zara took with the confidence of someone much older than her 8 years. Today, she carried the origami crane, its sea storm colors shifting in the afternoon light. The Meridian rose from the cliffside like a modernist dream, cantilevered floors of glass and steel that seemed to float above the Pacific. Zara made her way to her usual spot, a sculptural fountain near where the Aston Martin was typically parked. She placed the crane carefully on the edge of the fountain, positioning it so the hidden patterns would be revealed by the morning sun. As she turned to leave, a voice froze her in place. "You must be our mysterious visitor." Valencia Pierce stood a few yards away, her tailored pantsuit impeccable despite the late hour, her expression more curious than accusatory. Zara considered running, but instead straightened her shoulders and faced the woman directly. "I'm just leaving something," she said, gesturing to the crane. Valencia approached slowly, as one might toward a small woodland creature. "I see that. You're quite the artist. May I ask why you've been leaving these creations here?" Zara's eyes darted toward the mansion. "Is he home, Mr. Everett?" "No. Valencia replied, studying the child with increasing interest. He's in Silicon Valley until tomorrow. How do you know Mr. Everett? I don't, Zara said. Not really, but I know his music. Valencia's professional composure slipped for a fraction of a second. His music? Mr. Everett doesn't. He used to, Zara interrupted with the certainty of someone stating an obvious fact before he decided that numbers were safer than notes. The statement was so unexpected, so peculiarly specific, that Valencia found herself momentarily speechless. Thaddeus Everett's early experiments with algorithmic composition were not public knowledge, a footnote in his biography that most had forgotten or never known. "What's your name?" Valencia finally asked. "Zara Morgan. I live in Wisteria Cottage with my father." "Morgan," Valencia repeated, a flicker of recognition crossing her features. "Your father wouldn't happen to be Orion Morgan?" Zara nodded. "He helps people find their music when they've lost it." Valencia seemed to make a decision. "Well, Zara Morgan, since you've gone to such trouble, let me make sure Mr. Everett receives your crane personally this time." "Thank you," Zara said. "There will be one more tomorrow, the most important one." Before Valencia could respond, Zara darted away with the agility of someone intimately familiar with the property's layout, disappearing through the same security gap she'd used to enter. Valencia carefully picked up the origami crane, turning it in the fading light. As the angle changed, she gasped softly at the hidden patterns revealed, what appeared to be musical notation intricately drawn along the interior folds. Valencia had been with Thaddeus long enough to recognize the significance, though she couldn't possibly understand how an 8-year-old girl from Wisteria Cottage could know about a composition abandoned 30 years ago. That evening at Wisteria Cottage, Orion returned home exhausted from his double shift to find Zara in her usual spot on the living room floor, surrounded by art supplies. The television played quietly in the background, a local news segment about Halcyon Industries' latest breakthrough in quantum encryption. "Did you have a good day with Ms. Winters?" Orion asked, collapsing onto their well-worn couch. Zara murmured, focused on what appeared to be her most intricate creation yet, a 3-dimensional paper sculpture that resembled a heart, but not the Valentine's kind. This was anatomically correct, with chambers and vessels rendered in paper of varying thicknesses and translucencies. "What's that you're making?" Orion asked, leaning forward. "It's what happens when someone remembers something they tried very hard to forget," Zara explained, continuing to work with methodical precision. "Sometimes remembering hurts before it heals." Orion studied his daughter's face, noting the unusual intensity in her expression. "Zarbear, is everything okay? Did something happen at school today?" Zara finally looked up, her amber eyes meeting his. "Papa, what was my grandfather like, your father?" The question caught Orion off guard. They rarely discussed his family. "Why do you ask?" "Just wondering," Zara said with a shrug that attempted casualness but achieved the opposite. "We're doing a family tree project at school." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Orion because he kept meticulous track of Zara's school assignments, and Zara because the fabrication felt awkward on her tongue. Orion sighed, running a hand through his hair streaked prematurely with silver. "My father was complicated, brilliant, but distant. Music was our only real connection, and even that wasn't enough in the end." "What happened between you?" "He had a very specific vision for his life, and for mine. When I chose a different path, he decided that having no son was better than having one who disappointed him." Orion's voice had taken on a hollowness. That alarmed Zara. I haven't spoken to him in almost 15 years. Don't you miss him? Zara asked softly. A sad smile crossed Orion's face. You can't miss someone who was never really there to begin with, Zar. Even when we were in the same room, he was always somewhere else. His mind on his next big idea. Zara nodded, absorbing this information with the solemnity that often made adults uncomfortable around her. She returned to her paper heart, adding what appeared to be a jagged line across one chamber, like a scar or a tear that had been imperfectly mended. Would you ever want to see him again? She asked without looking up. That's enough questions. For tonight, Orion said gently but firmly. It's getting late and you have school tomorrow. As Zara packed away her art supplies, Orion noticed a brochure peeking out from beneath her sketchbook, the application for the Halcyon Arts Center program she'd mentioned that morning. He picked it up, noting the glossy photographs of state-of-the-art studios and beaming children engaged in creative pursuits. The Halcyon name was everywhere in Crystalline Bay, a constant reminder of the gulf between their modest life and the rarefied world just beyond their reach. Orion had chosen this location specifically for the excellent public schools, scraping together enough for the small cottage on the outskirts of the affluent community. But programs like this, exclusive, expensive opportunities that could nurture Zara's extraordinary talents, remained frustratingly out of reach. I'll look at the scholarship information, he said suddenly, surprising himself as much as Zara. Her face lit up. Really? You promise? I promise to look, he clarified. That's step one. Now, bedtime. Later, after tucking Zara in, Orion sat alone at the kitchen table with a glass of bourbon and the Halcyon Arts Center brochure. He flipped it over to read the fine print about scholarship eligibility when a name in the list of board members caught his eye. T. Everett, founder and chairman. The bourbon glass froze halfway to his lips. Thaddeus Everett, his father's name, seemed to leap from the page, reopening wounds Orion had convinced himself had long since scarred over. Impossible, he whispered to the empty kitchen. Crystalline Bay was exclusive, yes, but surely not so small that he'd unknowingly settled in the same community as his estranged father. Yet there was the name, and now that he thought about it, the ubiquitous Halcyon logo suddenly took on a new significance, the stylized H that had always reminded him vaguely of a musical note. Orion pulled out his phone, searching Thaddeus, Everett Halcyon Industries. The results confirmed his growing suspicion. The tech magnate who had revolutionized quantum computing, whose mansion dominated the Crystalline Bay coastline, whose car Orion had cursed each morning as it glided past their cottage, was the same man who had once told him that pursuing music was throwing away real talent on temporary noise. The revelation left him dizzy. For 5 years, they had been living in the shadow of the Meridian, breathing the same coastal air as the man who had excised Orion from his life as precisely as removing a cancerous growth. And now, unwittingly, Zara was asking to participate in a program bearing his name, funded by his fortune. Orion drained his bourbon, the irony burning more than the alcohol. Zara's questions about her grandfather now took on a new dimension. Had she somehow figured it out? No, that was impossible. He'd never shown her photographs, never mentioned names. Thaddeus Everett was just another tech billionaire to her, indistinguishable from the many who populated Crystalline Bay. Tomorrow, Orion decided he would begin researching other communities, other schools. Their time in Crystalline Bay had served its purpose. Zara had received an excellent educational foundation. Now they would move somewhere beyond the reach of Thaddeus, Everett's long shadow. What Orion couldn't know was that at that very moment, Valencia Pierce was placing Zara's origami crane on Thaddeus Everett's desk in his Silicon Valley office, alongside a dossier containing everything she had managed to discover about Zara. Morgan and her father in the hours since their encounter. A child has been leaving these at the Meridian, Valencia explained, watching her employer's face carefully. I thought you should see this one personally. Thaddeus barely glanced at the paper creation. I don't have time for pranks, Valencia. Increase security and ensure it doesn't happen again. With respect, sir, I think you should examine this particular one, Valencia persisted, uncharacteristically firm, specifically when held up to the light. Something in her tone made Thaddeus pause. He picked up the crane with surgical precision, as though handling potential evidence. Following Valencia's instruction, he held it toward the recessed lighting. Above his desk, the effect was immediate. Hidden within the folds, revealed only by directional light, was a fragment of musical notation. Not random notes, but a specific sequence he hadn't seen in 3 decades. The first measures of quantum resonance, the algorithmic composition he had abandoned to pursue what would eventually become Halcyon Industries' quantum computing platform. All color drained from Thaddeus's face. Who left this? He demanded, his voice uncommonly raw. Who would know about this? Valencia placed the dossier before him. Her name is Zara Morgan. She's 8 years old. And sir, her father is Orion Morgan. The name hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. His fingers tightened around the origami crane, nearly crushing it before he caught himself. Impossible, he whispered, unconsciously echoing his son's reaction from miles away. Orion has no children. He would be 36 now, Valencia supplied gently. The child's mother was Zelda Ayres, who passed away 7 years ago. They live in Wisteria Cottage at the edge of Crystalline Bay. They have been there for 5 years. Thaddeus fell heavily into his chair, the usual composed demeanor shattered by this cascade of revelations. 5 years. His son, the son he had effectively disowned when Orion chose music over the technology empire Thaddeus was building, had been living at the edge of his domain for 5 years. And now this child, his granddaughter, had somehow discovered a composition he had never published, never shared, had indeed locked away in both physical and digital vaults. The child said there would be one more tomorrow, Valencia added softly. She said it would be the most important one. Thaddeus's hand trembled slightly as he refolded the crane with careful precision. Cancel my remaining meetings. Have the jet prepared. We're returning to Crystalline Bay tonight. Morning dawned clear and crisp over Crystalline Bay, the October sun illuminating the Meridian's glass facade with golden light. Thaddeus Everett stood at the fountain, where each origami creation had been discovered. His usual tailored suit replaced by simple black trousers and a grey cashmere sweater, an approximation of casualness that still spoke of wealth and privilege. Valencia had arranged for Zara to be observed from a distance, tracking her movements without direct intervention. According to their security team, the child typically arrived between 7:15 and 7:30 a.m., using a temporary blind spot in the system that Thaddeus had now intentionally maintained rather than corrected. At precisely 7:22 a.m., the security feed showed a small figure with dark curls approaching the eastern perimeter. Thaddeus found himself holding his breath as Zara Morgan slipped onto his property with the practiced ease of someone who had done so many times before. She carried something crimson in her hands, the heart she had crafted in her living room the previous evening. Moving with purpose, she headed directly toward the fountain, unaware that today its usual solitude was disrupted by the presence of the estate's owner. Zara stopped abruptly when she spotted Thaddeus, her amber eyes widening with recognition, but not fear. They regarded each other across the space, the billionaire in his 62nd year and the child just beginning her 9th, connected by blood, neither fully understood yet. "You must be Mr. Everett," Zara said finally, her voice clear in the morning stillness. "And you must be the artist who's been leaving me messages," Thaddeus replied, struggling to maintain his usual authoritative tone. Zara nodded, approaching slowly until she stood directly before him. Up close, Thaddeus could see what Valencia's photographs hadn't captured. The child had Orion's eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at him with admiration before hardening into disappointment and eventually absence. "This is the last one," Zara said, offering the crimson paper heart. "It's the most important." Thaddeus accepted it with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Why have you been leaving these for me?" "Because you forgot something important," Zara answered with the directness of childhood. "I can see it whenever your car passes our cottage. It's like music that got trapped and turned into something hard and sharp inside you." In 15 years, she had never seen Thaddeus take a personal interest in any child, let alone one from outside his elite social circle. "And, sir," she ventured carefully, "how would you like to approach Mr. Morgan, given your history?" The question hung in the air, weighted with decades of silence and regret. How does one approach a son who was effectively disowned 15 years ago? What words could possibly bridge such a chasm? "I need to see it," Thaddeus said instead of answering. "Wisteria Cottage. I need to understand how they live." Valencia nodded, recognizing the redirection for what it was. "I'll have the security team conduct a discreet—" "No," Thaddeus cut her off. "Just driver coordinates. I'll go alone." "Sir, that's highly irregular. Your security protocols will be suspended for this one excursion." His tone left no room for debate. "And, Valencia, I want you to locate something in secure storage. The composition notebooks from 1992, 1994. They should be in Vault B, Section 7. Valencia's eyes widened slightly. Those years predated Halcyon Industries, back when Thaddeus Everett had been a promising mathematician whose algorithmic compositions had briefly garnered attention in academic circles before he'd abandoned music entirely for technology. "I'll retrieve them personally," she promised. After Valencia departed, Thaddeus turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific. The vast ocean had always centered him, its immutable patterns reinforcing his belief in natural order and predictable systems. Yet today, the rhythmic waves offered no comfort. His gaze drifted instead to the distant edges of Crystalline Bay, where modest homes nestled against hillsides, among them presumably Wisteria Cottage. For 15 years, he had successfully excised Orion from his life, redirecting the energy that might have gone toward fatherhood into building Halcyon Industries. The company had become his legacy, his identity, his purpose. He had convinced himself it was adequate compensation for the family he'd sacrificed. Yet in less than 24 hours, an 8-year-old girl with paper creations had dismantled that carefully constructed justification. Worse, she had done so not with accusation or judgment, but with the simple, clear-eyed perception that only children possess. "You forgot something important," she had said, as if abandoning his only son and missing the existence of his granddaughter were merely items left off a shopping list. The intercom chimed softly. "Sir," Valencia's voice reported, "the driver is ready whenever you are." Minutes later, Thaddeus sat in the back of a nondescript sedan, a deliberate departure from his usual Aston Martin, as it wound through Crystalline Bay's exclusive neighborhoods toward the less manicured edges of the community. He had dressed down in what his PR team might call billionaire casual, jeans that cost more than some people's monthly rent paired with a simple button-down shirt and leather jacket. The transition from Crystalline Bay proper to its outskirts was gradual but unmistakable. Manicured lawns gave way to natural vegetation, paved driveways to gravel paths, security gates to simple mailboxes. When the car pulled to a stop across from a small cottage, partially obscured by wisteria vines, Thaddeus felt a strange tightening in his chest. "Wait here," he instructed the driver, stepping out into the crisp autumn air. Wisteria Cottage was exactly as the name suggested, a modest structure nearly engulfed by the flowering vine that draped across its wooden face and tumbled over a small front porch. The property was well maintained, but clearly aging, with mismatched furniture visible. Through uncurtained windows and a garden that favored wildflowers over careful landscaping. It was as far from the Meridian as one could imagine. Organic, where his home was architectural, chaotic, where his was controlled, lived in, where his was showcased. Yet something about it triggered an unexpected nostalgia. Before his wealth, before Halcyon Industries, Thaddeus had lived in places not unlike this, humble spaces where creativity had flowed more freely than in the sterile minimalism he now preferred. The sound of piano music drifted through an open window, not a recording but live playing, technically imperfect but emotionally charged. Orion. Thaddeus recognized his son's distinctive style immediately, even after all these years. He had inherited his father's mathematical precision, but tempered it with an expressiveness Thaddeus had never managed to achieve. The melody was unfamiliar, yet somehow resonant, as though Thaddeus should recognize it but couldn't quite place it. He moved closer, careful to remain out of sight, when the front door suddenly opened. Zara emerged, book bag slung over one shoulder, followed by a man Thaddeus almost didn't recognize. Orion Morgan, at 36, looked both older and younger than Thaddeus had imagined. His features leaner, more defined than in youth, his posture relaxed in a way it had never been under his father's roof. His once jet black hair now showed strands of silver, and faded tattoos marked forearms that had once been pristine. "Remember? Straight to Ms. Winters after school," Orion was saying, adjusting Zara's collar with casual affection. "No detours, no adventures, no mysterious disappearances." "I promise," Zara replied, with a solemnity that suggested this was a new commitment following her morning excursion to the Meridian. "I mean it, Zara. You scared me this morning. If Miss Paulson hadn't seen you walking down Cliffside Drive..." Orion's voice tightened. "We talk about these things, remember? No secrets." Guilt flashed across Zara's expressive face. "I just had to deliver something important." "So important, you had to lie about where you were going." Orion knelt to her level, his tone gentle, despite the seriousness of his words. "Nothing is so important that you put yourself at risk or break our trust. Nothing." Zara nodded, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry, Papa." Orion pulled her into a quick embrace, pressing a kiss to her curls. "We'll talk more tonight. Be good today, okay?" As Zara headed down the gravel path toward what appeared to be a bus stop, Orion remained on the porch, watching until she reached the end of the property. His attentiveness struck Thaddeus forcefully. This was not supervision born of control or expectation, but of genuine care and protection. When had he last watched Orion that way? Had he ever? The moment Zara disappeared from view, something shifted in Orion's posture. The relaxed parent vanished, replaced by a man carrying a visible weight. He turned to re-enter the cottage and, for an instant, his gaze swept across the street. Thaddeus stepped back instinctively, but not quickly enough. There was a moment, brief but unmistakable, when father and son locked eyes across the distance. Recognition dawned on Orion's face, followed rapidly by shock, confusion, and a hardening into something like defensive anger. He took a half step forward, then abruptly turned and disappeared into the cottage, the door closing with decisive firmness. Thaddeus stood frozen, unprepared for this premature confrontation. He had intended only reconnaissance, a chance to observe from a safe distance before formulating his approach. Now that option was gone. Orion had seen him, and retreat would only compound the injury. With a decision that felt both impulsive and inevitable, Thaddeus crossed the street and approached the cottage. Each step seemed to carry the weight of the 15 years that had passed since they'd last spoken. At the door, he hesitated, then knocked with a restraint foreign to his usual commanding presence. The door opened immediately, as though Orion had been standing just on the other side, waiting. Indeed, his son's expression suggested he'd been engaged in a rapid internal debate about whether to acknowledge his father's presence at all. 15 years, Orion said without preamble, his voice controlled but underlaid with tension. 15 years of silence, and now you're standing on my porch. Why? The direct challenge was so reminiscent of the teenage Orion that Thaddeus almost smiled, despite the gravity of the moment. His son had never been one for social niceties or patient build-ups, a quality Thaddeus had alternately admired and found exasperating. "I met Zara this morning," Thaddeus answered, opting for honesty over the careful diplomatic approach he'd mentally rehearsed in the car. Thaddeus studied the paper heart, noticing its anatomical accuracy, the chambers, the vessels, the imperfect seam marking a long-ago injury. "And how would you know what's inside me?" "I can see things sometimes," Zara explained matter-of-factly. "Not like regular seeing, more like hearing shapes and colors that tell me about people. Mom called it my special knowing." "Your mother, Zelda." The name felt foreign on Thaddeus's tongue. Zara nodded. "She could see things too, but different. Papa says I got my artistic talent from her." She paused, studying Thaddeus with unnerving intensity. "But I think I got my music from him, and he got it from you." The simple statement struck Thaddeus with unexpected force. "What makes you think I have anything to do with music?" "Hold it up to the light," Zara instructed, pointing to the heart. "Like the crane, but different." Thaddeus did as instructed, angling the paper sculpture toward the morning sun. Unlike the crane, which had revealed hidden notation, the heart transformed entirely, the red paper becoming nearly transparent, revealing layer upon layer of intricate drawings. Not music this time, but faces, his own, younger and smiling. Orion as a child, seated at a piano, and a third face he didn't recognize, presumably Zelda. At the center, connecting all three, was a small figure with curly hair, Zara herself. "It's a family tree," Zara explained unnecessarily, "for my school project." The revelation hit Thaddeus with physical force. This child, this remarkable, perceptive child, had somehow discovered what no one else had pieced together. That, the distant tech mogul whose car passed her cottage each morning, was not just a wealthy stranger, but her grandfather. That the Halcyon Art Center she longed to attend bore the name of her own family legacy. "Does your father know?" Thaddeus managed to ask, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. Zara shook her head. "He found out you live here last night, when he saw your name in my art program brochure. He got really quiet and drank bourbon. I think he's planning for us to move away." The thought of Orion disappearing again, taking this extraordinary child with him, created a panic Thaddeus hadn't experienced in decades. "And what do you want, Zara Morgan?" Zara considered the question with seriousness. "I want to study art at Halcyon Art Center. I want Papa to play music again without looking sad afterward. And I think..." She hesitated, then continued. "With conviction, I think you need to remember that before you built computers that changed the world, you made music that could change people's hearts." In that moment, looking into the earnest face of his granddaughter, something shifted in Thaddeus Everett's carefully constructed worldview. The origami heart in his hands suddenly seemed to pulse with an impossible weight. The weight of choices made and paths not taken, of relationships severed and possibilities abandoned. His knees weakened, and for the first time in perhaps 20 years, Thaddeus Everett was not in complete control of his physical response. He sank onto the edge of the fountain, the paper heart trembling in his hands. "Are you okay?" Zara asked, concern replacing her usual certainty. "I'm not sure," Thaddeus answered honestly. "How did you know about the music, about quantum resonance?" "Is that what it's called?" Zara's face brightened. "I didn't know. I just kept seeing it whenever I thought about you. Notes that turned into numbers that turned back into notes. It was like they were trapped in the wrong shape." The description was so peculiar, yet so perfectly aligned with what quantum resonance had been, an experiment in translating mathematical sequences into musical notation, that Thaddeus felt a chill run down his spine. "Zara," he said finally, "would you like to meet me properly? Not as the man whose car passes your cottage, but as your grandfather?" Zara studied him with that unnerving perception. "I'd like that, but Papa might not." "That," Thaddeus acknowledged with a hint of his old determination, "will be a separate conversation." As the morning sun climbed higher over Crystalline Bay, casting long shadows from the Meridian across its manicured grounds, an unlikely pair sat by the fountain, the tech billionaire and the 8-year-old artist, the origami heart between them glowing crimson in the light, revealing connections that had always existed but had needed a child's perspective to become visible. For Thaddeus Everett, who had built empires by predicting technological futures, no algorithm could have forecast this moment, where a series of paper creations left by a small girl would cause his carefully constructed world to collapse, revealing something far more valuable in its place. The revelation beside the fountain left Thaddeus shaken in ways he hadn't experienced since the early days of Halcyon Industries, when every decision carried the weight of potential ruin. Back inside the Meridian, he moved through his minimalist sanctuary with unfamiliar uncertainty, the origami heart placed carefully on his otherwise pristine desk. "I've arranged for the car to take the child home," Valencia reported, entering his office with her usual efficiency. "She insisted she could walk, but I thought it prudent to ensure her safe return." Thaddeus nodded absently, his attention fixed on the crimson creation before him. "Did she say anything else?" "Only that her father would be looking for her soon, and that she hoped you would remember how to play." The phrase struck an uncomfortable chord. Remember how to play. Not just music, but the very concept had become foreign to Thaddeus Everett, whose life had been systematically stripped of anything resembling spontaneity or joy. Play was inefficient. Play was unpredictable. Play was what he had denied Orion, when his son had shown more interest in creating melodies than algorithms. "What do we know about their financial situation?" Thaddeus asked, changing direction. Valencia, accustomed to his abrupt pivots, consulted her tablet. "Wisteria Cottage is rented, not owned. Monthly income approximately $4,200 from Orion Morgan's. Position at Harmonic Haven Music Therapy Center, supplemented by occasional private piano lessons. No significant savings or investments. They appear to live modestly, but without immediate financial distress." "And the child's education?" "Crystalline Bay Elementary. Above-average academic performance, particularly in mathematics and visual arts. Her teachers have noted unusual artistic talent. There were recommendations for advanced placement in the school's gifted program, but Mr. Morgan declined, citing concerns about social integration." Thaddeus frowned. Declined? Why would he refuse enrichment opportunities for a clearly gifted child? Valencia hesitated, then offered carefully, perhaps to protect her from the kind of pressure that might transform talent into obligation. The pointed observation wasn't lost on Thaddeus. It was precisely what he had done to Orion, identified his mathematical brilliance early, and charted a course that allowed for no deviation, no exploration of other interests. When Orion had rebelled, choosing Juilliard over MIT, Thaddeus had delivered his ultimatum: follow the path laid out for him, or forfeit his place in the family. Orion had walked away without looking back. "The Halcyon Arts Center," Thaddeus said suddenly. "The child mentioned wanting to attend. What would that entail?" "The fall semester is already underway," Valencia replied. "However, as founder and chairman, your recommendation would supersede normal admission protocols. The scholarship committee would—" "No scholarships," Thaddeus interrupted. "I want a special mentorship program created, specifically tailored to her abilities, whatever resources she needs." Valencia made notes without comment, though her raised eyebrows spoke volumes. "She's been leaving Origami Creations at the Meridian." Orion's expression flickered with surprise before resettling into guardedness. "That's where she was? At your house?" "She's remarkably talented," Thaddeus continued, "and perceptive in ways that are unusual." "What exactly do you want?" Orion demanded, still blocking the doorway. "You show up after 15 years, lurking outside my home, and now you want to discuss my daughter's artistic habits? Are you here to criticize my parenting the way you criticized everything else about me?" The accusation stung, not because it was unfair, but because it was entirely justified. Thaddeus had indeed spent much of Orion's childhood and adolescence finding fault with his posture, his academic focus, his musical pursuits, his choice of friends, always with the rationalization that he was preparing his son for excellence, never acknowledging that he was systematically dismantling the boy's confidence. "I'm not here to criticize," Thaddeus said quietly. "I'm here because I should have come 5 years ago, or 15 years ago, or never left at all." The admission, unplanned and uncharacteristically vulnerable, hung between them. Orion studied his father with the analytical gaze they shared, assessing, evaluating, searching for the catch or manipulation behind the words. "Did you know we were here?" Orion finally asked. "All this time in Crystalline Bay?" "No," Thaddeus answered honestly. "Not until yesterday." "And now you're what? Curious? Checking to make sure we're not embarrassing the Everett name? Worried we might try to claim some of the Halcyon fortune?" The bitterness in Orion's voice was earned, yet Thaddeus found himself increasingly certain that this confrontation, however painful, was necessary. "May I come in? Please." The "please," a word so rarely used in Thaddeus Everett's vocabulary, seemed to surprise Orion as much as it did Thaddeus himself. After a moment's hesitation, Orion stepped back, opening the door wider in silent permission. The interior of Wisteria Cottage was a revelation. Where the Meridian was an exercise in curated minimalism, this home was an organic collage of lives being actively lived. Books spilled from shelves, musical instruments occupied corners, and artwork, clearly Zara's, covered nearly every wall. Not just childish drawings, but sophisticated explorations of color and form that would have been remarkable from someone 3 times her age. Most striking were the pairs of paintings that seemed to be in conversation with each other. Zara's visual interpretations of music. Clair de Lune manifested as silver-blue ripples across a midnight canvas. Rhapsody in Blue became sweeping arcs of indigo punctuated by bright notes of white and gold. Each painting was labeled in careful handwriting with both the musical piece and its composer. And there, above the upright piano that dominated one wall, was something that stopped Thaddeus cold. A painting labeled Quantum Resonance, unfinished, T. Everett. The canvas depicted mathematical formulas transforming into musical notation, then into waves of color that spiraled into something resembling cosmic dust, an astonishingly accurate visual representation of what Thaddeus had attempted to create 3 decades ago. She started that one a few months ago, Orion said, noticing his father's fixation. I had no idea where it came from. She said she heard it when your car drove past each morning. That's impossible, Thaddeus whispered. That composition was never published, never performed. It exists only in notebooks locked in my private vault. Orion shrugged, the casual gesture belying the significance of the moment. Zara sees things differently than most people. She always has. Her mother was the same way. Zelda. Thaddeus tried the name carefully. I didn't know. There's a lot you don't know, Orion replied, but the edge in his voice had softened slightly. Would you like coffee? This conversation feels like it requires caffeine. The normality of the offer, coffee between estranged family members, struck Thaddeus as both absurd and necessary. Yes, thank you. As Orion moved to the kitchen, Thaddeus remained in the living room, surrounded by evidence of the life his son had built without him. Photos of Orion and a woman with Zara's curls and amber eyes. Zelda, presumably. Images of the three of them in various locations. At the beach, in what appeared to be a music studio, at Zara's kindergarten graduation. Then, abruptly, only images of father and daughter. Zara growing older, Orion's smile becoming more practiced, less spontaneous. A small shrine occupied one corner of the room. A framed photograph of Zelda surrounded by candles, dried flowers, and small objects Thaddeus couldn't identify. Beside it, a painting that was clearly Zara's work, but different from the others. Darker, more chaotic, with swirls of black and purple surrounding a central figure dissolving at the edges. It was labeled simply, Mom's Journey. Leukemia, Orion said, returning with 2 mismatched mugs of coffee. Diagnosed when Zara was 6 months old. We had 5 years of remission then. He trailed off, handing Thaddeus a mug with Worlds. Okayest Dad printed on the side, an irony not lost on either of them. I'm sorry, Thaddeus said, the inadequacy of the words painfully apparent. Yeah, well, Orion sipped his coffee. Life happens. Even to those of us who failed to follow the Thaddeus Everett blueprint for success. There it was, the heart of the rift between them, laid bare in a single sardonic comment. The blueprint Thaddeus had insisted upon, the path he had demanded. Orion follow, the ultimatum that had severed their relationship. I was wrong, Thaddeus said suddenly, the words emerging with surprising ease despite having never been spoken aloud before. About all of it, about what your life should be, about what constituted success or failure. I was wrong, and you paid the price for my wrongness. Orion froze, coffee mug halfway to his lips, clearly unprepared for this straightforward admission. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with how to respond. 15 years of rehearsed recriminations suddenly obsolete in the face of his father's acknowledgement. Why now? He finally asked. What changed? Thaddeus considered the question, looking again at the painting of quantum resonance above the piano. Your daughter found something I thought was lost, something I didn't even realize I was missing until she showed it to me, reflected back through her eyes. The origami, Orion surmised. What exactly did she leave for you? Mathematical fragments of a musical composition I abandoned 30 years ago, hidden within paper creations that only revealed their contents when held at specific angles. To light, Thaddeus shook his head, still struggling to comprehend it. Work that exists nowhere except in notebooks I locked away before she was born. Orion set down his mug, rubbing his temples as though warding off a headache. Zara has always had this ability. Zelda called it resonant perception. She sees patterns others miss, connections that seem impossible. For years I thought it was just remarkable artistic intuition. But it's more than that. She perceives things that shouldn't be accessible to her. Like the relationship between us, Thaddeus said quietly. The final origami was a heart, anatomically correct, and when held to light, it revealed a family tree. She knew Orion. Somehow, she knew I was her grandfather. Orion's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. The school project. Her sudden questions about my father. She's been piecing it together all this time. He leaned back, a humorless laugh escaping him. And here I was, planning to move us away from Crystalline Bay to avoid any awkward encounters with the great Thaddeus Everett. I wouldn't blame you if you still did, Thaddeus said, surprising himself again with the candor. I have no right to disrupt the life you've built. No, you don't, Orion agreed bluntly. But that decision isn't just mine anymore. He gestured to the artwork surrounding them. Zara has her own connection to you now, one I didn't create or encourage. She found her way to you through whatever this strange ability of hers is. I can either honor that or suppress it, and I've spent 8 years trying never to do to her what you did to me. The parallels weren't lost on Thaddeus. His suppression of Orion's musical talents versus what would effectively be Orion suppressing. Zara's evident connection to her grandfather. The cycle of control and rejection that could continue into another generation if they let it. She wants to attend the Halcyon Arts Center, Thaddeus ventured carefully. Of course she does, Orion sighed. The irony isn't lost on me that the program that could best nurture her talents bears your name. I found the brochure last night, saw you were the chairman. That's when I realized who my neighbors have been all these years. I could arrange it, Thaddeus offered. Not as a scholarship. That would be charity, which I suspect neither of us wants, but as a recognition of exceptional talent. The center was designed precisely for children like Zara. Orion studied his father over the rim of his coffee mug. And what would be the cost of such an arrangement? Because there's always a cost with you. The observation was fair. Thaddeus had indeed always operated on transactional principles, expectations and obligations flowing in both directions, clear costs for every benefit provided. It had been the foundation of his relationship with Orion. Educational opportunities provided in exchange for academic excellence and adherence to the career path Thaddeus had chosen. No cost, Thaddeus said after a moment's reflection. No expectations beyond her participation. No control over her development or direction. Just opportunity. And what about us? Orion asked directly. What are you expecting there? Weekly family dinners? Tearful reconciliation? Your name? Back on my birth certificate? The sarcasm might have once provoked Thaddeus to cold retreat, but now he recognized it for what it was, a defensive mechanism protecting old wounds that had never properly healed. I'm expecting nothing, Thaddeus replied honestly. I forfeited any right to expectations 15 years ago. What happens between us now is entirely your decision. Orion seemed about to respond when his phone chimed. He glanced at the screen, frowning. It's Zara's school. Excuse me. He stepped into the kitchen, leaving Thaddeus alone among the evidence of the family life he had never known. The conversation was brief but concerning, judging by Orion's expression when he returned. Zara's in the nurse's office. Apparently she fainted during math class. They say she's fine now, but I need to go get her. Thaddeus stood immediately, instinctively concerned for a granddaughter he barely knew. Is there anything I can do? Orion hesitated, visibly weighing options. Actually, yes. I'm supposed to be teaching a music therapy session for children with autism in 30 minutes. I can't cancel. These kids need consistency, but I need to get Zara. He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture so familiar it created an echo across decades. Could you Would you drive me to get her? My car's in the shop and the replacement won't be ready until tomorrow. The request was practical, not sentimental, yet it represented a tentative trust that Thaddeus recognized as significant. Of course, my car is outside. The drive to Crystalline Bay Elementary was conducted in tense silence, both men processing the seismic shifts of the morning's revelations. Thaddeus navigated the streets with careful attention, hyper-aware of his son's presence beside him. The first time they had shared a confined space in 15 years. At the school, a modern glass and wood structure nestled against a hillside. Orion led the way to the administration office with the confidence of a parent who had walked these halls many times before. Thaddeus followed at a respectful distance, acutely aware of how out of place he felt in this environment of child-sized furniture and primary colors. The nurse's office was a cheerful space with underwater murals and comfortable cots. Zara sat on one, her usual vibrant energy subdued, a juice box in her hands. "Papa!" She brightened upon seeing Orion, though her eyes widened when she spotted Thaddeus behind him. "And you came too." "How are you feeling, Zarbear?" Orion asked, kneeling beside her cot and brushing curls from her forehead. "I'm okay. I just got dizzy during math. Miss Ellison said it might be because I didn't eat breakfast." Zara's gaze kept shifting to Thaddeus, curiosity evident in her expression. The school nurse, a middle-aged woman with a gentle demeanor, approached with a clipboard. "Mr. Morgan, has Zara been sleeping properly? Any changes in appetite or behavior?" "She was up early this morning," Orion replied, with a meaningful glance at his daughter. "And she might have skipped breakfast in her rush to catch the bus." Zara had the good grace to look sheepish, though her attention remained fixed on Thaddeus. "Are you here because of the heart?" she asked him directly. "Partly," Thaddeus answered, maintaining a respectful distance. "But mostly because your father needed a ride." The nurse looked between them, clearly sensing the complex dynamics at play. "Ms. Winters can take Zara home if you need to get to work, Mr. Morgan. All the paperwork is in order." "Actually," Orion said after a moment's hesitation, "this is Zara's grandfather, Thaddeus. He'll be helping out today." The simple introduction, Zara's grandfather, affected Thaddeus more profoundly than he had anticipated. It was an acknowledgement, however tentative, of a relationship he had no right to expect. "Well, that's wonderful," the nurse smiled warmly. "Zara, you never mentioned your grandfather lived nearby." "I just met him properly today," Zara replied with her characteristic directness, "but I've been leaving him messages for weeks." The nurse's smile faltered slightly, clearly unsure how to interpret this, but she recovered quickly. "I see. Well, she's good to go home. Just make sure she drinks plenty of fluids and has something substantial to eat." Outside the school, Orion knelt to Zara's level. "Listen, Zara, I need to teach my class at Harmonic Haven. It's the autism group, and you know how important consistency is for them." Zara nodded solemnly. "They get upset when routines change." "Exactly. So..." Orion hesitated, clearly struggling with what he was about to say. "Would it be okay if your grandfather takes you home and stays with you until I get back? It would just be for a couple of hours." Zara's face lit up with a smile that transformed her tired features. "Yes, we can work on my project." Orion shot a questioning look at Thaddeus, who nodded his agreement. "I'll have Valencia cancel my afternoon meetings." Zara," Orion continued, his tone serious. "This doesn't mean wandering off or any more secret missions, understand? You stay at the cottage with your grandfather, period." "I promise," Zara said, with the earnestness only an 8-year-old can muster. As they walked back to the car, Zara slipped her small hand into Thaddeus's with the casual confidence of someone who had decided a connection existed, regardless of history or circumstance. The gesture, so simple, so trusting, created a peculiar tightness in his chest. "I can show you how I knew," she said, looking up at him with Orion's analytical gaze embedded in Zelda's amber eyes. "About the music, about us being connected. I have all the pieces at home." "I'd like that," Thaddeus replied, finding that he truly meant it. For the first time in decades, his carefully scheduled day, his next acquisition, his market position, none of it seemed to matter compared to understanding the mystery of how this child had pierced the carefully constructed armor around his past. Orion watched this exchange with an expression that mixed caution with something approaching wonder. The great Thaddeus Everett, titan of technology, reduced to normal human scale by the simple act of holding his granddaughter's hand. "I'll be back by 3, Orion said as they reached the car. "Zara knows where everything is if she gets hungry. And Thaddeus..." He hesitated. Years of hurt and distrust warring with the practical necessity of the moment. "Thank you." It was a small acknowledgement, tentative and fragile. Yet in that moment, it felt to Thaddeus like the most significant achievement of his considerable lifetime. Not the billions in his accounts, not the technological revolution he had helped spark, but these 2 simple words from the son he had lost and might, just might, have the chance to find again. As the nondescript sedan pulled away from Crystalline Bay Elementary, carrying a billionaire, his granddaughter, and the tentative possibility of reconciliation, Thaddeus Everett found himself entering unknown territory, a world where algorithms couldn't predict outcomes, where control was an illusion, and where an 8-year-old girl with paper creations might be his most important guide. Back at Wisteria Cottage, Zara moved through the living room with newfound energy, gathering sketchbooks and art supplies with purposeful determination. Thaddeus stood awkwardly in the center of the space, a man accustomed to commanding boardrooms, suddenly uncertain of his place in this modest home, filled with evidence of creativity and connection. "You can sit there," Zara pointed to the worn armchair by the window. "That's where Papa sits when he watches me work." Thaddeus lowered himself into the chair, noting how it conformed to his body, molded by years of Orion's presence. From this vantage point, he had a different perspective on the living room, noticing details that had escaped him earlier. The small, upright piano was well used but meticulously maintained. Shelves sagged under the weight of books ranging from classical literature to modern science. Photographs captured moments of genuine joy rather than posed perfection. "Are you hungry?" Zara asked, her head tilted in consideration. "I can make sandwiches. Papa taught me how to use a knife safely." "I'm fine," Thaddeus assured her, though in truth he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten. Meals at the Meridian were scheduled with the same precision as business meetings, prepared by a private chef and consumed with mechanical efficiency. Zara nodded, then hesitated. "Can I ask you something? Was it hard to read the heart? Did it make you sad?" The directness of the question caught Thaddeus off guard. Children in his limited experience were guided through carefully choreographed interactions with him. The children of business associates, politicians, celebrities, taught to be impressed but distant, never asking personal questions. "Yes," he answered with unexpected honesty, "to both questions." Zara considered this, then nodded as if confirming a theory. "I thought so. That's why I made it last. You needed to see the others first, to remember the music. Music makes hard things easier sometimes. Is that what your father teaches at Harmonic Haven?" Papa helps people who can't talk or who get overwhelmed find ways to express themselves through sound. He says music is a bridge between worlds that seem far apart." The description struck Thaddeus with unexpected force. A bridge between worlds that seem far apart. Wasn't that exactly what Zara had created with her origami messages? a bridge across 15 years of silence, across generations of misunderstanding. "I want to show you something," Zara said, settling cross-legged. On the floor with a large sketchbook. "This is how I knew." She opened the book to reveal what appeared to be a peculiar family tree, but unlike conventional diagrams with neat branches and names, this was a visual symphony of interconnected colors, patterns, and musical notations. "I started seeing the connections when your car first drove past our cottage," Zara explained, her small finger tracing a line of indigo blue that traveled from a figure Thaddeus recognized as himself to one clearly representing Orion. "There was a melody that followed your car, something complicated and mathematical, but also sad, like it was looking for its other half. And you could hear this?" Thaddeus asked, trying to understand. "Not like regular hearing, more like..." Zara frowned, searching for words to explain the inexplicable. "Like how you can feel a storm coming before it rains. The music was always there around you, but it was trapped. And Papa has the same music, but his flows freely. When I realized they were parts of the same song, I knew you were connected." Thaddeus studied the visual representation in wonder. The girl had captured something essential about both him and Orion. Their similarities and differences, their fundamental connection, expressed not in words or traditional diagrams, but in a visual language of music and color. "Then I started leaving you messages," Zara continued, turning pages to show preliminary sketches of each origami creation. "The butterfly was first because butterflies mean transformation. The crane was for longevity and family connection. Each one had a piece of the song I kept hearing. Your song." "Quantum resonance," Thaddeus murmured. "Is that what it's called?" "It's a good name. It's about how things that seem separate are actually connected by invisible patterns." Zara looked up at him with those disconcertingly perceptive eyes. "Like us." The simplicity of her statement belied its profound implications. "Like us, a family connected by invisible patterns despite years of deliberate separation. A quantum entanglement that persisted regardless of distance or time." "Did your father ever mention me?" Thaddeus asked, treading carefully. "Before today?" Zara shook her head. "Not really. Sometimes when he played certain pieces on the piano, he would get a faraway look. And once he said, 'That's how my father taught me to interpret Bach.' But mostly he doesn't talk about before. Before. Before Mom died, before we came to Crystalline Bay. He calls it before, like it's a place we left, not a time." This insight into how Orion had compartmentalized his past, including but not limited to his relationship with his father, struck Thaddeus as both practical and poignant. His son had created a temporal boundary, a before and after, with Zelda's death as the dividing line. "What about your mother?" Thaddeus ventured. "What was she like?" A smile transformed Zara's solemn face. "She was amazing. She could see music too, but differently than me. She said sounds had shapes and colors that most people miss." The smile faltered slightly. "That's why she understood me when others thought I was just making things up. Like your ability to perceive quantum resonance without ever having heard it." "Exactly." Zara's eyes lit up at being understood. "Mom would have explained it better. She was a synesthesia researcher before she got sick." "Synesthesia?" Thaddeus leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. The term was familiar from his early work in cognitive computing, the neurological phenomenon where stimulation of one sensory pathway leads to automatic involuntary experiences in another. "It's when your senses cross paths," Zara explained, with the confidence of someone who had grown up discussing complex neurological concepts. "Some people taste colors or see sounds. Mum could see the shape of music. She said, 'I have projective, music to visual synesthesia with enhanced pattern recognition.' Dear, she pronounced the clinical terms with practiced ease. That's why I can paint what songs look like." And that's how you perceived quantum resonance even though you'd never heard it performed? Zara nodded earnestly. It was all around. You'd like an aura of sound. Once I started seeing it, I couldn't stop. That's when I knew I had to help you remember. The child's perception challenged everything Thaddeus understood about the boundaries between individuals, the neat separation he had maintained between his past and present, between his abandoned musical aspirations and his technological empire, between the father he had been and the man he had become. May I? Thaddeus gestured to the piano that dominated one wall of the living room. Zara nodded, watching intently as he moved across the room and settled onto the bench. It had been years, decades really, since Thaddeus had played with any seriousness. His fingers hovered over the keys, suddenly uncertain. Papa says when you forget how to start, begin with what you remember best. Zara offered helpfully, coming to stand beside the piano. What did he remember best? Not the complex algorithmic compositions that had briefly made his name in academic circles. Not the theoretical work that had eventually led to Halcyon Industries' breakthrough in quantum computing. No, what his fingers remembered was much simpler. A Bach prelude he had taught Orion when his son was barely tall enough to reach the pedals. He began to play, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as muscle memory awakened. The prelude unfurled in the cottage, filling the space with ordered mathematical beauty. Bach had understood what Thaddeus had later tried to capture in his own compositions, that mathematics and music were not separate disciplines, but different expressions of the same fundamental patterns. Zara watched with wide eyes, her head slightly tilted as if seeing something beyond the man at the piano. "The colors are aligning," she whispered. "Your aura is getting clearer." Thaddeus continued playing, moving from Bach to fragments of his own composition, Quantum Resonance, the piece that had been his bridge between mathematics and music before he had abandoned it for the more concrete rewards of technology. The notes felt foreign, yet familiar, like revisiting a childhood home, now inhabited by strangers. "That's it!" Zara exclaimed. "That's the song I've been hearing around you." As Thaddeus played the unfinished composition, Zara hurried to her sketchbook, flipping to a blank page and beginning to draw with feverish intensity. Her small hands moved across the paper with uncanny precision, capturing something only she could perceive. The piece ended abruptly at exactly the point where Thaddeus had abandoned it 30 years ago. The final notes hung in the air, unresolved, seeking a conclusion that had never been written. "It's not finished," Zara observed, looking up from her drawing. "It stops right when it's about to resolve." "I never completed it," Thaddeus admitted. "I chose a different path." "But the rest exists somewhere," Zara insisted. "I can see it, like it's waiting to be found." Before Thaddeus could respond, the sound of a key in the lock announced Orion's return. He entered the cottage, pausing at the threshold when he saw Thaddeus at the piano, an expression of complex emotions crossing his face. "You were playing," Orion said, the simple observation loaded with unspoken significance. "Grandpa was showing me quantum resonance," Zara explained, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "But it's not finished. The colors just stop." Orion's eyebrows rose slightly at Zara's casual use of grandpa, but he made no comment on it. Instead, he set down his bag and approached the piano, his movements cautious, as if approaching an unpredictable animal. "I remember when you were working on that," he said quietly. "I used to listen outside your study door. You never knew I was there." The admission created a pang in Thaddeus's chest, the image of young Orion, hungry for connection, secretly absorbing his father's music from the hallway rather than being welcomed into the creative process. "I didn't know you remembered it," Thaddeus said. "I remember more than you think," Orion replied, his tone neutral rather than accusatory. "How was the afternoon?" he asked, shifting his attention to Zara. Feeling better? Much better. I showed Grandpa my synesthesia drawings and explained about the music connections. He played piano. So I heard. Orion's expression softened as he regarded his daughter's enthusiasm. Why don't you go wash up for dinner? We should let your grandfather get back to his schedule. Zara looked between the two men, clearly reluctant to leave at this crucial juncture, but we're figuring out the song. It needs to be finished. Another time, perhaps, Thaddeus said, recognizing Orion's need to re-establish boundaries after this unexpected incursion into their lives. I've already taken up more of your afternoon than planned. Will you come back tomorrow? Zara asked directly, immune to adult subtleties. I want to show you the rest of my drawings. Orion interjected gently but firmly. Zarbear, Mr. Grandfather Thaddeus is a very busy man. He runs an entire technology company. Actually, Thaddeus found himself saying, I could return tomorrow, if that's acceptable to you, Orion. The offer hung between them. Not a demand, not an expectation, but a request that acknowledged Orion's authority in his own home, his right to determine the parameters of this emerging relationship. Orion studied his father, clearly weighing complex considerations. We'll be here, he said finally. Zara has art class until noon, but after that, we'll be here. It wasn't enthusiastic permission, but it was permission nonetheless. Thaddeus nodded, accepting these terms with a humility foreign to his usual negotiations. Excellent. Zara clapped her hands together. Tomorrow we can work on finishing the song. Zara, Orion warned gently, remember what we've discussed about expectations. Sometimes things don't. I'll bring my original notebooks, Thaddeus interrupted, surprising himself as much as Orion, the ones with all my work on quantum resonance. Perhaps between the three of us we can find its proper conclusion. The promise delighted Zara, who beamed with vindication before darting off, to wash up as instructed. In her absence, the two men regarded each other across the living room, decades of estrangement and recent revelations creating a complex atmosphere. You don't have to do this, Orion said quietly. She'll be disappointed initially, but she's resilient. You can return to your life and we'll continue with ours. The offer was genuinely meant, a release valve, a permission to retreat back to the comfortable distance Thaddeus had maintained for 15 years. It would be the easier path for everyone involved. Is that what you want? Thaddeus asked. Orion considered the question with the same analytical thoroughness he had inherited from his father. What I want, he said finally, is what's best for Zara. She's already lost her mother. I won't have her experience another loss if you decide this family experiment isn't to your liking in a week or a month. The concern was legitimate, the protective instinct admirable. Thaddeus recognized in his son the father he himself had failed to be. Attuned to emotional needs, vigilant against potential harm, prioritizing his child's well-being above all else. I understand, Thaddeus said, and I can offer no guarantees beyond this. I will be here tomorrow with the notebooks as promised. What develops beyond that will be improvised. The admission of uncertainty, anathema to the carefully controlled life Thaddeus had constructed, seemed to surprise Orion. Improvisation was never your strong suit, he observed, a hint of his old defiance surfacing. Perhaps it's time I learned, Thaddeus replied simply. The drive back to the Meridian was conducted in contemplative silence. The nondescript sedan wound through Crystalline Bay's exclusive neighborhoods, passing mansions and estates that represented the stratosphere of wealth to which Thaddeus had ascended. Yet for perhaps the first time, he viewed these monuments to affluence with a critical eye, noting their isolation, their performative grandeur, their fundamental emptiness. At the Meridian, Valencia awaited him with her usual efficiency, a sleek, carbon fiber case in her hands. "The notebooks, sir, as requested, and Mr. Sato has called 3 times regarding the Singapore acquisition. He insists it's urgent." "It always is," Thaddeus observed dryly, accepting the case with careful hands. "Tell him I'll call in the morning. I have more pressing matters this evening." Valencia's eyebrow arched slightly, but she made no comment. In 15 years as his executive assistant, this might have been the first time Thaddeus Everett had prioritized personal matters over a 9-figure acquisition. In his private study, Thaddeus opened the carbon fiber case, revealing 5 leather-bound notebooks preserved in archival quality protective sleeves. He removed them with reverent care. These artifacts from a life abandoned, the life of Thaddeus Everett, theoretical mathematician and musical composer, before he had transformed into the tech titan known for ruthless innovation and market dominance. The earliest notebook dated from 1991, filled with his precise handwriting, mathematical formulas interspersed with musical notation, the boundaries between disciplines blurring as he'd explored the algorithmic underpinnings of musical composition. Page after page documented his attempt to translate quantum mathematics into audible patterns, to make the invisible architecture of the universe not just understandable, but beautiful. Quantum resonance had been his most ambitious project, an attempt to create music that embodied the principles of quantum entanglement, where particles once connected remain responsive to each other's states regardless of distance. He had abandoned it when the practical applications of his quantum research became apparent, when he'd realized that computing, not composition, would be his legacy. The final notebook ended mid-calculation, the composition trailing off exactly where he had played it for Zara that afternoon. What would have come next? Where would the musical exploration of quantum entanglement have led if he hadn't abandoned it for more lucrative pursuits? Thaddeus closed the notebook, suddenly understanding what Zara had meant about the music being trapped. He had imprisoned his own creativity, locked it away in secure storage, along with the mathematical brilliance that might have served more than just market domination. The realization prompted an unprecedented action. Thaddeus moved to his rarely used piano, a magnificent Bosendorfer maintained in perfect condition despite its neglect, and began to play. Not Bach this time, not even the fragments of quantum resonance he had shared with Zara, but something new emerging from the confluence of past and present, of abandonment and rediscovery. As his fingers moved across the keys, Thaddeus found himself imagining what Zara might see in this improvisation, what colors, what patterns, what connections might be revealed through her extraordinary perception. The thought of his granddaughter's gift, this ability to perceive the underlying structures connecting seemingly disparate elements, filled him with wonder and, unexpectedly, hope. For decades, Thaddeus had believed his legacy would be halcyon. Industries, the technological innovations, the market capitalizations, the buildings bearing his name. Now, for the first time, he considered a different possibility. Perhaps his true legacy was not in silicon and algorithms, but in the genetic code that had produced a son who found healing in music and a granddaughter who could see the colors of sound. The next morning, Thaddeus arrived at Wisteria Cottage precisely at noon, the carbon fiber case containing his notebooks in one hand and, somewhat self-consciously, a small bag from Crystalline Bay's premier art supply store in the other. He had spent an hour in the shop, utterly out of his element among easels and specialized papers, until a patient sales associate had helped him select materials appropriate for projective music-to-visual synesthesia, as he had awkwardly described Zara's gift. Orion answered the door, his expression guarded but not unwelcoming. "Right on time," he observed, stepping back to allow entry. "Zara should be home from art class any minute." Ms. Winters is dropping her off. The cottage felt different in the midday light, more vibrant, less shadowed. Or perhaps it was Thaddeus himself who had changed, his perception altered by the events of the past 24 hours. "I brought these," he said, indicating the case of notebooks. "And this." He held up the art supply bag with uncharacteristic uncertainty. The sales associate assured me their professional grade. Orion accepted the bag, examining its contents with surprise. Prismacolor Premier pencils, Arches watercolor paper, Winsor & Newton paints. This is serious equipment. "Is it inappropriate?" Thaddeus asked, genuinely concerned. "I should have consulted you first. I don't want to overstep." The worry, so at odds with the imperious certainty that had characterized their past relationship, seemed to catch Orion off guard. "No, it's fine. It's..." He paused, clearly recalibrating. "It's thoughtful. Thank you." Before either could navigate further into this unfamiliar territory of cautious politeness, the front door burst open and Zara entered in a whirlwind of energy, her school backpack slung over one shoulder, a portfolio of artwork clutched to her chest. "You came!" she exclaimed upon seeing Thaddeus, her delight unrestrained by the adult complexities surrounding their newfound relationship. "And you brought the notebooks." "As promised," Thaddeus confirmed, warmed by her enthusiasm. "And some art supplies, if your father approves." Zara's eyes widened at the bag Orion held. "Are those Prismacolors? The ones with 150 colors?" At her father's nod, she let out a small gasp of delight. "Now I can really show you what quantum resonance looks like." What followed was an afternoon unlike any in Thaddeus Everett's carefully regulated existence. The three of them sat at the cottage's dining table, which gradually disappeared beneath a landscape of opened notebooks, drawings, mathematical calculations, and art supplies. Thaddeus explained his original concept for quantum resonance, showing the mathematical foundations that had inspired the composition. Zara, in turn, demonstrated how she saw the music, using her new supplies to create vivid visual representations of the auditory experience. And Orion, initially reserved, gradually became engaged in the process, his own musical training allowing him to bridge the gap between his father's mathematical approach and his daughter's synesthetic perception. The composition stalls here because the mathematics reached a paradox, Thaddeus explained, pointing to his final calculation. "I couldn't resolve the quantum entanglement equation into a musical progression that satisfied both the mathematics and the aesthetics." "That's where the colors get tangled," Zara observed, indicating a snarl of indigo and gold in her visual representation, like they're trying to separate but can't. "Because they're fundamentally connected," Orion murmured, studying both the mathematical formula and the artwork. "That's the point of entanglement. Separation is an illusion." The observation hit Thaddeus with unexpected force. Separation is an illusion. Wasn't that the essential truth Zara had been trying to show him with her origami messages? That despite 15 years of silence, despite his deliberate excision of Orion from his life, they remained connected, entangled through the invisible. Threads of genetics, memory, and shared passion for patterns. "What if," Orion said slowly, moving to the piano, "the resolution isn't about separating the elements, but embracing their inherent connection?" He began to play, picking up where Thaddeus's composition had abandoned the problem, but approaching it from a different angle, not forcing mathematical precision, but allowing the emotional resonance to guide the development. The music unfurled in the cottage, building on Thaddeus's foundation, but extending it into something both more complex and more accessible. "Yes!" Zara exclaimed, grabbing her pencils and beginning to draw with feverish intensity. "The colors are unwinding, finding their proper places." Thaddeus watched in amazement as his son transformed the unfinished composition, finding pathways through the mathematical paradox by prioritizing emotional truth over theoretical purity. It was precisely what he had been unable to do 30 years ago, to trust that beauty could emerge from embracing complexity rather than forcing resolution. As Orion played, Thaddeus found himself drawn to the piano bench, sitting beside his son, just as they had done decades earlier, when Orion was a child learning Bach under his father's rigorous instruction. But now, the dynamic was reversed. Orion leading, Thaddeus following, the son showing the father a way forward. Tentatively, Thaddeus joined the composition, adding counterpoint to Orion's melody, their four hands creating something neither could have produced alone. The music filled the cottage, weaving around them, connecting three generations in a moment of creation that transcended the wounds of the past. Zara drew furiously, her small hands moving across the paper with uncanny precision, capturing in color and line what the two men were creating in sound. When the impromptu composition reached its natural conclusion, a silence fell over the cottage. Not the awkward silence of estrangement, but the rich silence that follows genuine communion. "That," Orion said quietly, "is how quantum resonance was meant to resolve." Thaddeus nodded, unable to speak past the emotion constricting his throat. His son had found the answer that had eluded him, had completed what he had abandoned. But more than that, in this spontaneous collaboration, they had begun to bridge the chasm 15 years had carved between them. "Look," Zara said, holding up her completed drawing. "The family tree is balanced now." The artwork was extraordinary, a visual representation of their musical collaboration, but also something more. The patterns and colors that had been tangled in her earlier drawings now flowed in harmonious relation, three distinct lines interweaving without losing their individual character. "Is that us?" Orion asked, studying the intricate image. You're the blue line, strong and flowing. Grandpa is the gold one, complex and precise, and I'm the purple that connects you both." Zara pointed to where the lines formed an intricate knot before spreading outward together. "See, we're entangled." The simple observation, delivered with a child's directness, encapsulated what the afternoon had revealed, that despite years of separation, despite choices that had led them in different directions, a fundamental connection remained, like particles that, once entangled, respond to each other across any distance. Thaddeus studied the drawing, seeing in its complex beauty not just Zara's extraordinary gift, but a visual representation of what might still be possible. Not an erasure of the past and its painful choices, but a new pattern emerging from their entanglement. "I'd like to have this framed," he said, the request itself an acknowledgement that this moment mattered, that he wanted to preserve it. "If that's all right with the artist." "You can have this one," Zara agreed magnanimously. "I'll make more." As we keep working on the music, the casual assumption of continued collaboration, of a future that included all three of them creating together, hung in the air. Thaddeus looked to Orion, understanding that this was his decision to make. He was the father, the one who had been present, the one who had built a life for himself and his daughter despite Thaddeus's absence. "We could continue next weekend," Orion said after a moment's consideration. "Zara has a half day on Friday. We could come to the Meridian, perhaps. See your piano, the one you always said had better action than anything Juilliard owned." The invitation, for it was that, despite being phrased as an acceptance, represented a monumental shift. Orion was offering not just continued contact, but a step toward integration, allowing Zara into Thaddeus's world rather than keeping these nascent connections confined to Wisteria Cottage. "I would like that very much," Thaddeus replied, the simple words inadequate to express the complex emotions behind them. Zara, sensing the significance of the moment even if she didn't fully understand its context, beamed with satisfaction. And we can bring my art supplies, and Grandpa can show us his super fancy computer lab, and one step at a time, Zarbear, Orion cautioned gently. Let's start with the piano and see where things go from there. As the afternoon light began to shift toward evening, Thaddeus reluctantly prepared to depart, gathering his notebooks with care. At the door he paused, finding himself uncharacteristically hesitant. "Thank you," he said finally, addressing both Orion and Zara. "For today, for..." He gestured vaguely, unable to articulate exactly what he was grateful for. The music, the connection, the possibility of redemption. "See you Friday," Zara called cheerfully, apparently immune to the emotional undercurrents swirling around the adults. Orion's response was more measured, but the hostility that had marked their early interactions had softened into something approaching cautious hope. "Friday," he confirmed. "We'll be there at 1. As Thaddeus walked back to his car, he found his steps lighter than they had been in years. The Meridian awaited him, with its commanding views, its technological marvels, its profound isolation. But for the first time in decades, the mansion on the cliff no longer felt like his only domain. A different kind of wealth had revealed itself to him, one measured not in market capitalization or property portfolios, but in the specific shade of purple that connected blue and gold lines in his granddaughter's extraordinary drawing. 15 years ago, Thaddeus Everett had delivered an ultimatum that severed his relationship with his son. And now, an 8-year-old girl with paper creations and remarkable perception had offered him something he had never thought to seek. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of a different future. One where separation was recognized as the illusion it had always been, where quantum entanglement manifested not just in mathematical formulas, but in the resilient bonds of family. As he slid into the car, Thaddeus placed Zara's drawing carefully beside him on the seat. Tomorrow would bring board meetings and acquisition strategies, the familiar rhythm of the empire he had built. But Friday promised something entirely new. A different kind of resonance, a harmonious resolution to a composition long abandoned. And for the billionaire who had once collapsed at the revelation hidden within a paper heart, this new possibility felt richer than all the wealth he had accumulated in its absence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.